'cause I really like what you done to me. I can't really explain it. I'm so into you.
Hey love, this is Cammy.
And it's Troy. And we're coming to y'all with our 5 takes and tips for dating in 2025. So as you may have seen that we have the dating and matchmaking service out right now.
Christian dating
And
matchmaking services.
And we do want to pander to people that if you're new into your faith and you're trying to figure it out, trying to go through that, that's fine too. It's up to the person to decide if they're ready to take on somebody who would be considered a novice trying to learn about the faith and go through that process. And so if you're in a space where you're a believer and you're a newer believer, don't think you got to be this seasoned holiness vet, to be a part of that. If you're trying to walk a certain line, that's what those things are set up for. Conversations about faith and belief should be part of the dating process. And so we just wanted to give our 5 takes or tips for Christian dating in 2025. The things that helped us not only in long distance, but what we're seeing help people in a close proximity of dating as well. We believe that these 5 things can be transferable to any realm of dating as well. You want to add anything to that?
So I think a lot of people have been asking us about like our tips and how do we survive, especially not only dating but long distance dating. And I think that it was just about time that we shared with the world our tips. I'm not saying this is going to work for everybody, but I definitely know it did help us get to where we are now. And we are very blessed to be in this space where we have such an amazing, flourishing, and healthy marriage, but it was not always easy. So we're going to give y'all those tips to try to get through those parts and those times.
So we're going to start off with one of the ones that was on my list. We had a list that we were kind of going through 5 different things, and then some of them ended up to be on both our lists. Some of them were unique to the individual minds. Was a timeline, and when I talked through my wife, with it, I said, this is a big one, right? Because no one wants to waste their time. Time is one of the things that we can't get back, and that was one of the things that I said to her, like, hey, when we started dating, it was like, what's your timeline for this? What's your timeline for children? What's your timeline for marriage? What's your timeline for, any business endeavors and career things that you want to do? What is the timeline for this? Because we can't be boyfriend and girlfriend forever.
And I told him I wasn't waiting forever. And that's what I was so grateful about. Like, he wanted to be a husband and I wanted to be a wife. I was not about to date you for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus years. I wasn't going to do that. I am a wife before you even married me. And so I knew what I could add, not being arrogant, but I definitely knew what I could add to his life and I knew what he could add to mine. So I'm like, we can date, we can get to know each other, but we need to do this a godly way. So I was very grateful that his timeline matched up with my timeline.
And as men, you do need to have a timeline for things. There's a timeline when you should leave a job. There's a timeline in which you should, start this business, right? So why should the same thing not equate to a relationship? And if she's following your lead, then there needs to be some type of timeline put in place so that she knows how long this is going to take. What goals should we be setting in between that time? The timeline is crucial for the woman to see where she fits into your pattern of relationship and where she sees you fitting into that. But it also causes both sides not to waste any time. So if the timelines don't match to what your preference is or what you would like to see, then that may not be the best person for you. It helps you to not waste, 6, 7, almost 10 years in a place that you're not supposed to be, because it's not the right fit for you. Not that that person is bad, not that that person is not for somebody else, right? But their timeline may fit somebody else and may not fit you. So timelines work in helping it sell the relationship, but it also helps in dispelling those relationships that you're not supposed to be in. So I think that was one of the big things that I took away from my specific list of, one of the tips. So tip number 1 is going to be timeline.
So the next tip is going to be, you have to be willing to be flexible. One thing that Troy and I, we're just going to be very honest and transparent. Y'all are our family at this point. So, one thing that he would talk about in the beginning was the fact that he had never been in a long distance relationship. I had been in one before, and so although those did not work out, I always would tell him, like, if you want it to work, it can work and it will work. I knew for this specific man that I wanted this to work. I knew without a doubt that this man was the one that I wanted to do life with and the one that I wanted to marry. So I always used to tell him, like, just be flexible to trying something new. You have to be willing, and you have to, well, I don't want to cut into it, but you have to be very patient with them, especially learning something new. He didn't know how this was going. Although, honestly, I didn't know everything either, but I was very open and very flexible to trying to make this work because I know I wanted it, and obviously in the end, and in the beginning, and in the middle, he wanted it too. He just had to be flexible and understanding that this is something new and this is something that we're going to have to work through together.
And whether long distance or in close proximity dating,
right,
you have to understand that you are two working adults that are trying to balance schedules, right, and make time for that person. So the flexibility may be, hey, I'm only going to get 2 to 3 hours of your time, whether that's an hour in the morning, an hour at your lunchtime, or an hour at nighttime. Or you may not get the lunch conversation. You may get a text during lunch, and the texting happens so that his lunchtime or her lunchtime is not ran down. You may get 2 hours at the end of the day, right? The flexibility should be around what the two people have available. You make time for what you actually want. And so as far as that's concerned, like people say, I don't have time for this, I don't have time for that. No, it's just that you're not making time. And that may mean that you need to better manage your schedule to be flexible around what your partner needs and what they need to talk about. And so at that point you realize, okay, if I feel as though my partner needs more time, let me be flexible. And the time I was going to spend on TV or the game, or for ladies, the time I was going to spend scrolling on social media or online shopping, I'm going to dedicate that time to the person that I'm being intentional with, because the time that you make during this dating space will actually help during marriage. And that's going to translate over that you have to be even more flexible because you're committed to this person now. Absolutely. You're practicing this flexibility during this dating space, but you have to try to master it as best as possible during dating. So when it translates over to marriage, it's not so difficult to acclimate to this person having majority of your time. And so that flexibility was a big piece because I worked during this time frame. She worked during this time frame. I got up super early, so by the time I got home, I was tired. But I made time for things. It was intentional about the things we would do, being flexible with schedules, finding out when vacation time was. All of those things, especially being long distance, we had to book flights. Absolutely. We had to schedule time off of work. Like, we had to go into our flexibility at another level. And so if you want to be, in this dating game in 2025, flexible would be the tip number 2 that we're going to give. You have to be flexible. Some people have children. If you're dating in that arena, you have to be flexible with that. Some people are part of organizations and they do a lot of volunteer work. So that may be, some people have 2, 3 jobs and definitely have a different aspect of things that they need to do. So as far as that's concerned, you have to be flexible with what is presented to you in the forefront.
And also, must I add into this, you don't want to start this when you get married. You want to start this in the dating space, and you want to make sure you're practicing this in this dating space. Don't think that you're just going to randomly get married and you're going to become the most flexible person. It's not going to happen like that.
No.
It's not.
Absolutely. Well, tip number 3 is going to be grace. So this is one that I chose because it went hand in hand with another one that I had on my paper, which was patience. But I felt grace spoke to it a little bit better because you can be patient, right? But if you don't have any grace, you actually won't be in a space where you allow room for that person to change. And so if there's a quality about this person that you want to change, you want to get better, you have to leave room for grace for that person to have progressive steps. So there were things that, like, I would talk to my partner, I'm like, hey, I need you to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And it didn't happen overnight. So if I didn't give any grace for the mess ups, for the fact that, like, this is a repeat of me having to tell you something. This is a repeat for her having to tell me something. If there was no grace there, then we would both just be done with each other after the first or second time that something was repeated. There's a level of grace. Should you just let somebody run over you? No. Should you let your boundaries be crossed? Absolutely not. But there needs to be a level of grace that you have for that person to say, hey, this, and this bothers me. And if it's something that they're used to doing, like I smack. I have times where I chew and it's loud. And I had to have grace from her to say like, hey, this is something I've been doing for 25 plus years. And so you have to bear with me in the moments of trying to progress this to the point of your liking, or we can come to a mutual ground. But if she didn't have that grace and she immediately equated to, you know, what I hear the lady say, he gave me the ick, right? If you immediately make that thing, there's no room for grace for that. And every time you get the ick, it's going to be out. Like that person is gone.
And must I add, if you want grace, you have to be willing to give grace. I think that's going to be a big thing here in these dating stages. It will be times where, you know, if I can be very honest and transparent, again, that I was a hypocrite. I was a hypocrite. I messed up, sorry. Okay. If I can be honest, there were times and there were spaces where I was a hypocrite. Just to be very honest and open. There were times where he would give me so much grace, and it would be a moment that I know, you know, like, I was wrong. But I'm not about to be in a space where I give you grace. And that's wrong. It's wrong, and I was able to admit that and acknowledge that in that moment, just the same way you have given me. First of all, God's grace is what I would think about. I would always think about God's grace and how he is so gracious towards us, even when we don't deserve it. And so the fact that my now husband, was so gracious to me, and there were times where I didn't show that same grace, but I got checked very quickly. And it's like, how dare I sit here knowing this man has been so gracious and he does this little small thing and I don't feel like I have to show him grace? That's not how that goes. And
I learned not to abuse my grace either. So just because I was giving so much grace doesn't mean when it was time for my grace, I don't make a correction.
Yes,
so
good.
I don't sit in the place of like, all right, I give so much grace that I don't have to correct anything. No, if she gives me grace for this moment, that does mean I got to go back to the drawing board and actually correct that thing, put some actionable things in place. And sometimes put in checkpoints. Hey, I did it this way. Was this a little bit better than last time? So those things, they help and they add to your layer of being able to see that your grace is actually working to the improvement of the person. Absolutely. And so grace is going to be a big one. That can also segue into tip number 4.
Tip number 4 is be understanding. I'm preaching to the choir. On this one, I am definitely preaching to the choir. I had a very hard time in the beginning being understanding. It would be times where like, what do you mean you worked a whole 8 hours, 9 hours, and then you traveled for an hour home and you don't want to talk to me while you're in the car? That was a big one for me, but I had to understand, like, you're human. You know what I'm saying? You need this time to decompress. And I had to realize I had to be understanding. I had to be that time and that space for him. So when he is ready to talk to me, he can come and he can be ready to actually have a conversation. If I'm trying to talk to you when you just got off, you're tired, you're driving an hour, you're in traffic, it's just bound for something to come out, some anger, some frustration, and you didn't really mean it. So I had to be understanding to know you need your space. And there were so many different times that he was understanding, and we used to literally just feed off of each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, we both were learning how to be understanding, especially being in this long distance and starting off with that. And even if you're not long distance, you have to understand, maybe I don't want to see you this day. Maybe I'm too tired to, pick up the phone. Maybe I had a long week. Maybe I don't want to go out Friday night. Can we go out Sunday morning for brunch or breakfast? I'm sorry. Can we go out for brunch? Like, you have to be understanding. You have to be willing to be back to it, to be flexible. You really do.
And that understanding piece comes with a level of sacrifice. because when you're understanding of the person and what they need, you're putting their needs before yours. And so the understanding was like, I do want to talk to him because he's had a long day. But when I explained the decompression time, my job at the time was to talk to people for 8 hours about any and everything, any issue financially that I, working in finance industry. So what my job was to talk to people for 8 hours, I didn't necessarily feel like talking.
You didn't have it in them. And
I needed an hour of time on my commute home to not have any type of verbal dialogue. I just needed to be silent, whether listening to music or riding in silence. That was my time to do that. And so she sacrificed not being able to talk to me immediately at the end of my day and waiting for a duration of time until she could talk to me. That was sacrifice. I had to sacrifice and understand that she was in a space where when it came to long distance dating, it was like, yo, I need you to find a way to be in my city and in my presence. Like, I need you to find a way for us to have that personal, intimate, intentional time. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to make it work. And I had to be understanding that that's what she needed to go on, because the days that we were, having conversations back and forth, different issues that may arise, the enemy try to use anything, I had to make it my business and understand that I got to make actual face-to-face time in person. So with that understanding came sacrifice. The type of things I thought I was going to be able to do, I'm like, I got to sacrifice it because I got to be willing to show her that she's a priority. So with that understanding, when you have a clear understanding of what a person needs, it actually makes it easier because you don't have to wonder.
You don't got to assume.
You don't got to assume and guess.
Not at all.
None of that. So you can have a clear understanding. And I think that piece was a good thing to put on the list, because it helped overall to kind of pull things together. Because once you understand a person, you don't have to try to fight back and forth and, go through all this mystery. Last tip, which can combine all of them, tip number 5, is communication.
Communication.
Now, this was one that I'm going to say was on both of our lists.
Yes.
It was kind of like our top thing that we both had on both lists. So we were like, this definitely has to go on there as being both of our, tips as far as, communication is concerned. Communication was one of the top effective ways that we had got through our dating space.
Absolutely.
Like, when I tell you, from anything and everything that we could have conversations about, it was like, we need to be able to understand each other. So conversations that, like, we weren't talking just to be talking. Like, a lot of times we had to break down barriers of negative things we learned when it came to conversations, especially in relationships. There's a dynamic in which believing in a biblical marriage means that there was a level of submission that she had to me as her future husband. She portrayed that through the communication. So she had been raised around men her entire life. So she didn't talk to a man a certain way. She didn't degrade me in a certain way and belittle in the conversations. She would respect me as a man and say, I'm going to submit to him. Prior to a ring, I'm going to learn what that looks like. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and figure that out, right? But in that same time, I had to leave room as the man, knowing in the future that I'm going to have to treat my wife the way Christ treats the church. So Christ doesn't just silence us altogether. The Bible says that to ask questions means that you are going through the mindset of wanting to know God in his full understanding. So I couldn't just shut my wife down or my future wife down and say, no, I'm not having a conversation. No, it's not up for debate. I would say, what do you think about that? Have the communication. And I was listening to comprehend, not to respond.
Yeah, and he certainly had to stretch me in that area. That goes along with the grace and the patience and the flexibility. That was one area that I struggled in that. In the beginning, I struggled so much, and it really took a lot of patience for him to work through that with me. And I got to a space where I'm like, I would shut down. I don't know what to say about this. I don't know what to say about that. So he would find different ways to communicate with me, because you really have to be able to communicate. Yes, that's a big thing, but you have to be able to effectively do it. Mm-hmm. Like if he's talking to me and communicating with me and I have no clue what he is saying or talking about, or I'm not in a space where I can receive that, it's like communication is falling on dead ears. And so you really have to learn how to effectively communicate. Mm-hmm. That's a big one, especially if you're gearing towards marriage. I couldn't just shut down. Like there's times where, yes, I might want my peace and my quiet for 10 minutes, but within that 30 minutes and that hour, I need to be able to come to my husband or my boyfriend, my partner, and be able to talk and communicate what's going on, my issues, my frustrations. Why am I happy? Why am I sad? Why am I angry? That's something that I am still learning, and he has been so patient with me. We are just both learning that communication is something that we both have to work on daily. Mm-hmm. It's not you're going to be able to learn that you need to communicate and you'll have it overnight. It's not going to be a microwave thing. It's not at all. So you really have to work at communicating with your partner every single day, effectively communicating.
And for men, I think it's harder sometimes when we are rooted in such like realistic aspects. Mm-hmm. We are, how is that thing really happening, right? And so sometimes you have to allow room, because women are like water and men are like the dams that keep them in. Mm-hmm. So we are solid, foundational, very rooted in structure. Women have a tendency to flow and go with the current, go with the feeling that is there. Women have a more emotional component to them. Regardless of what has been redefined as the modern woman, naturally women have the ability to have more hormonal aspects to them. And so with that aspect in mind, there may be a feeling of something, right? But no actual reality. As men, we have a tendency to check out because of that, when the reality is, if you just let her be heard in what she feels, yes, then you can give the reality to combat the feeling. So what happens is most time we're just saying, that's not actually happening. That's not true, right? And we jump immediately to reality without ever acknowledging how the woman feels. So we say, I understand you feel like this, and I'm even sorry that you're feeling that. Mm-hmm. The reality is, this is where we actually are. And now when you lay out the foundation of the reality, you can start to, piece by piece, debunk the feeling with the reality. Absolutely. And start to gradually walk her through the place of reality and feeling. So when you start to take that time, communication becomes a big piece, because you have to communicate all of that. You have to communicate that's a feeling versus a reality. Yeah. You have to communicate what the reality is, and you have to guide her to the reality of the thing. And so what happens is, like, you don't just dismiss her feeling, you actually acknowledge it, but then you also walk her through how to get past just the feeling, and say, like, where can we come to mutual grounds to understand that if you feel like this, what things can we put in place that you can communicate you're feeling like this, so I know that's the case, right? I'm a very emotional, intelligent person where I can notice her nonverbal cues and see the things that she's expressing without verbally expressing anything.
It takes 5 seconds for him.
And I literally see, I'm like, I notice your tone change or your body language. Pay attention to those things and give room for her to feel comfortable enough to explain something that bothered her and what it felt like versus what it actually was. Hey, I'm sorry you felt that way, but it was actually this, and I'm sorry that that's going. How can in the future I try to figure out how that can't feel that way, and maybe change some things in the reality to not make it seem like what it was. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is going to be changed. Hey, that was just a feeling. I need you to self-regulate, right? We had a lot of conversations about self-regulate. But again, this was communication. This was us figuring out what triggered her, what things even triggered me, because men can have triggers too. What things put you in that space and then effectively talking about a common ground that we can come to figure out how we can better service each other. Relationship is about service. It's another layer of service. It's I service you and be the things that you need a man to be in your life, and you service me to be the things I need a woman to be in my life. And so when you're in the service industry, you have time for people to give feedback. And the way feedback comes is either written or oral. So in our world in general, we are geared towards trying to communicate in an effective way. And if we don't have that set in place, just like our businesses and different things that we have communication in will crumble, so will this.
I absolutely agree.
So that's the tips that we have. Yeah. We hope they were helpful to you. And if you have any other questions, we are going to be putting something out very soon where you guys can ask questions. Things you want us to talk about, things you want us to have conversations about. We done been through a lot just within a year, and so that's
we made it through a lot.
And we are able to talk about it and go through the process, walk you through step by step, and even some things that are interesting that we have. We talk about relationship stuff all the time, so stuff that's happening in our climate and our world. That is changing the foundation of things in regards to relationship. We want to know where y'all are at so we can better service you guys to get to this thing called godly love.
Absolutely. My man hit it on the spot. I ain't got nothing to say.
So we thank y'all for tuning into the video.
Thank you so much.
And we hope to see you soon.
Yes, we love y'all. Bye.
Peace.
'Cause I really like what you done to me. I can't really explain it. I'm so into you.